What do you think are some of the biggest issues today that not a lot of people are talking about?
2020, private equity companies owned 4% of the companies in our country. Today, they own 20% of the companies. We have the S&P 500, you know this all too well, in which 3 companies own 40% of the S&P 500. Mm-hmm. Now, you might say, well, those are passive investments, Codie. They don't actually own that. They're in ETFs. You know, they don't get to choose who, but they still get governance rights. And Bill McNabb, CEO of Vanguard, for instance, has publicly, said out loud, we are not passive in our governance, actually. So what do we have? We have big companies continuing to own everything, and we become renters underneath them.
Now, I thought the stockholders of those ETFs still are able to cast a vote based on how many they own. So that doesn't fall necessarily on like Vanguard, let's just say.
Well, it depends on what kind of structure they have it in. So it depends on if it's an active versus a passive ETF. It depends on how the shareholder vote works. So if you have, for instance, like when I was at Vanguard back in the day, you could have an ETF that had to get a majority of X people to vote on Y situation. But here's how it works. Vanguard reaches out to those shareholders and pushes them to make varying decisions. They also are the ones that get to educate them on what decision they think they should make or not. As a shareholder of a Vanguard ETF, how much do I know about what the governance of ExxonMobil should be that's inside of there? I know dick all. Plus, I don't have time for that. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go with the recommendation of the company that manages my assets overall. And oh, by the way, it's not just shareholder votes. It's also what happens in the boardroom. So they're not allowed to influence decisions, except of course they do. You don't think that if, I don't know, Deloitte has as their highest shareholder BlackRock, they're not going to take meetings with BlackRock. And when BlackRock says, here's our core initiatives that we want to have all companies we work with execute on, Deloitte's not going to pay attention to that? Of course they are. And so there's both hard power, aka shareholder voting rights, and there's soft power, aka what might they do if XYZ happens.
You don't think they would want people to vote in something that's in their best interest? Because it seems to me like if they're pushing people to a certain thing, that certain thing will ultimately make the shareholder more money. They wouldn't want to impact performance of the stock. So like they want the stock price to go up. Like they want you to do better. They have a vested interest in that because they'll take a percentage.
I think that makes sense theoretically, except what have we seen happen? We've seen shareholder votes go for DEI over making money, for instance. Frequently.
Is that shareholder voting that's doing that, or is that the government kind of like putting their hands in the thing?
Let's put it this way. Let's say Vanguard, they have created this, so State Street, which I worked at too, they've created entities that only invest in companies that have XYZ characteristics, right? So those XYZ characteristics might be a woman or a minority on the board. Right? And if they don't have that, they won't fit into this bucket.
But I thought that's because certain government agencies are funding companies like that. So these investment firms have just made companies like that to get funding. And because it's become more popular among certain groups, they do this because it just makes money.
That's one bucket, but not all. Because you have so many corporations that do no business with the government that still have these corporate initiatives that might sound good. It goes back to that second and third order effect. It might sound good, but does it actually benefit the user? Like, I don't know about most people listening, but I don't ever want to be chosen because I'm a woman and a Latina. I want to be chosen because I'm the best person for the job. And yeah, I'd like to have a wider breadth of people that we're choosing from for varying board positions, but don't hire me because I'm a female. That's crazy. Hire me because I'm best or hire somebody else. But yeah, I think you have some government entities that get contracts because they are listed as veteran-owned, female-owned, minority-owned. Sure. And increasingly, we see a lot of government funding going to institutions like that. But we certainly have corporate non-government entities that are still being influenced the exact same way. And that's just one instance. I think the problem in the US today that nobody's talking about is too few people own everything. And I actually think we can push back on it quite a bit. And my last little, push here is a perfect example is, say you buy from Amazon, I don't know, coffee cups. Those Amazon coffee cups leave in your local economy somewhere around 10 to 16 cents. If you were to go to a store locally in Vegas and buy a coffee cup, you leave about 60 cents to every dollar in your local economy. And so what we've had happen is we have these centers that are gobbling up tons of the profits and not centralizing them locally in our economy. And so I don't think we realize the implications of that yet as these big companies get so big. It's why antitrust and monopoly are actually important. And I'm like a bit of a libertarian, so I'm kind of like the government get out of the way, except they start getting subsidies and government tax credits. And so maybe being libertarian is also limiting all of that.
It's hard for me to find a reason why I wouldn't do the Amazon example and like purchase locally, because it's just, they make it so much easier to be able to like.
Would. That's the point. The whole buy local thing doesn't work. So what works instead, in my opinion, is that you own local businesses that service customers better, more consistently. We can't tell users to not use Amazon. It's way too convenient. The product's way too good. And we've given them a ton of subsidies and taxes in order for it to be better and better and better. So what do we have to do instead? We have to, in the areas where we can compete with the big guys, we need to own those businesses instead of letting private equity companies and the big corporations own it all.
Yeah. Well, it really just seems like the only businesses worth going to are retail establishments that you can't get online, like getting your nails done or getting your hair done or a dentist's office.
Yeah, services. So you can have, personal services. That's what you just might get my hair done, get my nails done. Home services, which would be like roofing, landscaping, cleaning, plumbing. You could also have professional services, which is like if you guys have ever worked with a personal accountant that's local, oftentimes way better than going to TurboTax or a centralized professional services business. So those three verticals, human touch is still really necessary. And oh, by the way, if you're scared of AI, the last thing that'll be taken over are my plumbing companies. Those will last much longer than the graphic design companies and even than us on the internet. We're going to have AI versions of us everywhere. Yeah. And we will be taken over before the hands-on service-based businesses will.
It would be incredible. It just got me thinking. This is what's going to happen. Those Elon Musk robots?
Yep.
Imagine you program them with AI and they could fix anything. All of a sudden, they're a licensed electrician, a licensed contractor, a licensed plumber. And you go to your robot and say, hey, robot, this sink isn't draining. And it just downloads, it just immediately searches Google, finds the answer, looks at the thing, is like, all right, I'm going to fix it.
So I'm
going to go to the Home Depot and buy the equipment. I can see that happening.
That will probably eventually happen, but we're investors in like a few really big robot companies, one called Figure. So Figure is Brett Adcock's company, multi-billion-dollar company. And what's interesting with these robots is it is so complex to build a human robot that has ability to do multi-functions that they just came up with a way for a robot to avoid somebody if they're coming at them. Like that's brand new. This ability was incredibly difficult, and Figure's the only one that's been able to do it. We are so far away from a multi-function robot that it's hard to imagine. And so, there's a lot of things that can be run remotely with human intervention, but we're far from that. What's going to happen first is that accountants and bankers and attorneys will be robotized online. And that will happen much prior to, it's almost difficult to understand the complexity of plumbing. Like you have to have somebody come to your location. You have to have somebody have the ability to have tactile function with things that is incredibly difficult to replicate with humans right now.
I think at one time we're all going to be in a pod somewhere. We're going to have our robot figures like in public. So you could be home, but it's kind of true. Like you could be home right now, like in a pod.
This sounds awful. I hate this for us.
But you have your robot, like go to the Starbucks. But that robot could like run faster than you could drive.
That is interesting.
And you just sit there like a video game, like you're playing the video game avatar of yourself, going to the Starbucks.
And in your pod, you could be so perfectly regulated where you live like 300 years. And then you just have your robot like actually living your life where you're like simulation controlling that. Work. And you have like an ab machine on you. You're getting like carrot injected into your veins, like fruits and vegetables.
Imagine doing roofing, like you're a roofer, except you don't have to exert your body anymore. Like you have the like robot version of you going to work.
As soon as you're talking, it's all high level, and then we start talking, it just devolves.
I don't think it's devolved. I could see that happening.
Well, sure, but that's such a Hail Mary prediction that like
a place where you could have your robot go and pick up heavy things, way heavier than you could do yourself, and it's not back-breaking work.
I think
do you think we'd be happier if we did that as a society?
I think
think
it
so,
really
too.
depends.
You do?
I do. Yeah, imagine you're you're in a pod and you could joke with all the other robots like you're playing a video game. It's like, imagine you're playing a video game except you're getting paid to do a job within the video game.
The only way is if it's completely indistinguishable from real life. That's when it would be fine, where you literally could not tell. It's the simulation theory where you could not tell. But I feel like if there's a splinter of doubt of like, wait, my robot is not actually me, then all of a sudden that's going to send you in some sort of like a existential crisis. And you're like, what am I even doing? Get me out of this pod. Get these things out of my arms.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
Well, maybe. I mean, I think more likely is some sort of like consciousness development that goes beyond, it's something like Neuralink. But I think, it would be think about it today. What do we know for sure? We know that the more we use technology and the more we are in our phones and online and gaming, the less happy we are. It's what the data tells us. The less human engagement that we have, the less happy we are. The less human touch we have, the less happy we are. The less you work out, your happiness drops. The less vitamin D you get from the sun, your happiness drops. So I think the idea of being in a pod continuously, maybe I'm older, but I think it sounds fascinating, but you go straight to Neo in the Matrix.